Hello, friends. Hope everybody's doing well. Glad you're here with me today. So, this is the scene I'm going to tackle today. It's a lake in a urban forest in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where I've been for about the past week. It's an absolutely beautiful spot. And I saw this little area where you've got these kind of stands of trees just out there in the water. I just think it looks so cool. And I like the shape of the foliage over here, how it kind of swoops around in this big S, or not S, but like a big curving shape, and it goes back up. So kind of a little curving shape that does that. And I like that it's a very simple composition, just basically this big mass of trees cutting through the middle and then expanding out over this way, and then these little individual trees just sitting out there in the water. Then we've got some interesting reflections going on, and of course, this lovely sky with these puffy clouds. So there's a lot that I'm going to need to tackle in this photo. It's got a bit of everything. It's got clouds, it's got water, it's got reflections. There's some really interesting highlights I want to preserve, like this area right here where you've got these white branches, some highlights on this trunk here and here, also out here on this tree. And I just think it's a very simple, powerful, and evocative composition. I also like this kind of moss that's hanging straight down up in this tree. I'm really going to try to emulate that. You got the Spanish moss on this tree as well. So there's a lot going on in this scene. Even though it's a simple composition, it would be very easy for me to get lost in all of these details. There's too much going on in this photo for me to actually paint. So what do? Well, I need to simplify it. I need to condense all of this down into something that I can actually try to paint, because I can't paint this. It's too much. It's too overwhelming. I wouldn't even know where to start. So a way that I can simplify this is by doing a value study. And what I'm looking for is to condense this scene into 3 values: light, middle, and dark. And essentially what I'm doing is looking for one big middle value shape across the entire scene. And if you squint your eyes down, you can kind of see where the darker shape is. It's the reflection here, it's all of this foliage here, and then it's basically every bit of foliage is going to be included in the middle value shape. There it is. It's relatively straightforward in this case. Sometimes it's a lot more complicated than that. Some of the reflections, like this reflection here, are also going to be included in middle value. And then within the middle value, you can see some of the shadow areas of the foliage, the shadow areas of this trunk right here, even parts of the reflection shadows here and here. That's all going to be dark, which is going to be painted into the big middle value shape, and that will help us create more separation between different shapes. So I've got my sketch kind of set up here. It's a very bare bones sketch, very minimalistic, which is intentional. So let's get into actually painting this value study, and you can see how I condense all of this down into something that's more readable. Okay, so I've got my reference photo right there so I can look at it as I do this. Got my nice big 2-liter bucket of water. And I'm just going to mix up a puddle of Payne's Gray on my palette. Alright, so we're just going to drop in that foliage in the background. This is very loose and impressionistic. I'm not worrying about any sort of detail in this stage. I'm just blocking in the shape for everything that I'm deciding to include in middle value. Kind of just hinting at the tops of those trees, Coming down around to this little stand of trees that's just sitting in the water. Paying attention for any highlights that I want to preserve in this area here. And that area where the trees are reflecting in the water will also be middle value. Break that shape up a little bit towards the edge to indicate some of those ripples on the water. Again, this will be way, way more detailed when I go to do the actual painting. This is just a study. This is just helping me set the stage. It's helping me understand what's happening in the scene. And this shape of the background trees will connect right into this shape here. I'm looking for ways to connect all of these different elements into one big shape. That's all middle value. This reflection, just very roughly indicate that. This reflection actually goes down farther. You can make it sloppy and messy as long as you understand what's going on. It's just a value study. No need to get carried away in details. Okay, preserve the highlight on that trunk there. There's another one on this trunk here too. And then the shape of this foliage here will connect right into these background trees again. You're physically making the shape connect on the paper. There's a little area of dark reflection here. I want to make sure I get that in there. I might switch to a smaller brush, get my Escoda Perla out, so I can drop in some of these branches. Just very roughly dropping this in. This also gives me a chance to practice for the real painting. Practice some of my brush strokes, get nice and warmed up. So I'm giving myself a roadmap to follow for when I do the actual painting, and I'm also practicing the painting beforehand. So I know what to expect. I know things that I have to watch out for. Just nice, loose, rough, impressionistic. So continuing with that background foliage into this clump of trees right here. Back into the background foliage. And on over, continuing with that background foliage, there's this tree right here. There's a really pretty highlight on this trunk that I want to preserve. It's kind of a gnarled, twisting look to it, which I really like. So paint around that highlight on this side right there. Keeping in mind the direction that the sun is shining, where the light's coming from. some really interesting movement in the shape of these branches that I quite like. So I'm just practicing getting some of those shapes in there. Okay, so there's our big middle value shape. And that's most of the composition. Well, in fact, that is the entire composition. This is what makes up the bulk of the scene, is the big middle value shape, that bold shape that catches your eye from across the room. Your painting should be able to be understood standing at a distance. You shouldn't have to be right up on it to know what's going on. And doing this will help you create that big, bold shape. See, even with just this grayscale, just one tone of Payne's gray, we can pretty much tell what's going on here. We can tell there's reflections, that there's ripples. We're starting to put the pieces together, right? It's a very, very powerful tool, value studies. So now that we've got our middle value, we can go back in and start looking for any dark areas. So there's going to be some darks right here in this area of foliage. There's some shadows towards the base of all the foliage. This is going to help it give a lot of three-dimensionality, and painting around this area of foliage here, that'll help pop this out as a highlight. The base of this needs some dark. Painting the darks in is what's going to give everything that three-dimensional look. Make everything look like it has volume and depth. Some shadows on this trunk. By the way, the nature sounds that you hear in the background of all of my videos, I record myself out in the field. And the ones that you're hearing for this video, I recorded at this exact, well, not this exact spot, but at this lake. So if you want to be able to have these recordings for yourself, there's a link in the description where you can download them on my Bandcamp. My Search for Silence is the name that you're looking for. I really love recording nature sounds. It's one of my favorite things to do. It's just such a peaceful and satisfying process. I can make a whole other YouTube channel just dedicated to how that works. Okay, I'm also looking for opportunities to find connections within the darks as well. The more connections you can find, the more opportunities you find for the paint to flow and bleed into itself and mix on the paper, the more magic you can extract from the watercolor. So the base of this clump of foliage here, and then down some into the reflection. Just creating more textures and more ripples as it goes down and off the page. Darken this branch. I'm not going to paint every single branch, just enough to help me understand what's going on in the scene, that's all. And if we really want to pop out some of these highlights, we can just bring the darks right up to it. Just like that. See how much brighter that white is now that there's a dark next to it? It's all about finding those areas of contrast. All right, so just the base of all of this distant tree line, just indicate some trunks in there, here and there. I'm not going to paint every single trunk because that would look ridiculous and it would take too long. There's a little trunk in there somewhere. Just hint at that. I'll do a better job of that in the real painting. This is just sloppy, fast and loose. We don't want to use too many darks in our distant objects, because darks will draw your eye. Unless you want the viewer's eye to be drawn into the background, which sometimes you do, but most of the time you want them to be looking at your focal point. And we can kind of do some negative painting and kind of indicate the edges of some of these distinct trees. And notice how I didn't paint one single tree back here, I just painted it as one mass, connecting everything together. And then just darken up some of these trunks here. Nothing too crazy. Darken up a few of those branches. Pop that highlight out right there a little more. Darken up some of this massive trunks. There's a bunch of trunks in this little clump. Darken out the base of this shape. That'll actually help separate it from the water by doing that. All right, and that's really all there is to it. So if I grab my reference photo again, we can kind of see what I did. So here's the photo. Here's the value study. So just one big shape where all the middle values are connecting with each other and flowing into each other. And then within that shape, we have the darks. So this is a great starting point for my painting. Now, this is something I can paint. I can't paint that. That's just way too much. Too much information, too much detail. I can deal with this. I can work with that. Now all I'm going to be doing is painting this exact same shape again, but using color. And obviously spending a little more time on the details. So let me reset my workspace and we'll get right into the painting. Okay, so I have my value study and my reference photo right there in front of me so I can alternate back and forth between the two. And I'm just going to paint my reference, or my value study again, but in color. Now, one thing that I didn't paint in my value study were the clouds, so let's just start with that. This really nice sky with puffy clouds. There was a big rainstorm the night before this. And so this is just left over from that. So I'm just mixing up some sky colors on my palette here, and then I need to wet both sides of this paper down. And that lighter color there is for closer towards the horizon. So we'll leave that as it is for now. Grab my sponge and then just wet down both sides of the paper so that it lays flat and so that I have more time to work wet into wet, which is what I need when I'm working with skies and clouds. Alright, this should stay wet for long enough, and if it starts to dry out before I'm ready, I've got this little spray bottle here. It was like $3 on Amazon. I can use that to keep it wet, keep life in it. Alright. So I'm going to be painting around these clouds, around the shape of the clouds. And I just mixed up some cobalt blue and some, I think this is cobalt blue light for my sky. It'll be darker towards the top of the sky. I'm just painting around the shape of these clouds. In my mind, I'm just thinking I'm painting the shape that the blue sky makes, and I just dropped my brush, but that's fine. I'm painting the shape that the blue sky makes, not painting the clouds. It's kind of a trick that I use with this, because negative painting can be a difficult concept to get your head around sometimes. It's not a natural way to paint at first. It can become natural with practice, though. Rinse that brush off. Get into that lighter mixture of blue. Start dropping that in. Yeah, this will give us some nice fluffy clouds. So we'll just mix up a little bit of gray, throw some Payne's gray in there, just a little bit, some burnt umber. This will help us give some volume and shape to these clouds. I'm just tapping my brush on this rag to get rid of some of that excess water. I don't want the brush to be too wet. When you're painting wet into wet, that's something you got to be careful of, is not having too much water on the brush. That's how you get cauliflower edges. And I can take a clean, damp brush, just get most of the water off of it, and then I can use this to create some smoother edges here and there. I think the base of some of these clouds needs to be just a little darker still. Throw some more Payne's gray into that blue. Give us a nice dark blue-gray color. Just creating a little more volume in a few areas of these clouds. All right, I think that'll just about do it for the sky. Just gonna give this a little spray. And we're just gonna continue that wash straight down. So we'll start indicating some of the yellow of that foliage. Just throw some cadmium yellow right into this blue mixture on the palette. It's a nice earthy green. Now for the water, clear off some space on the palette. I'm basically just going to cover the whole area of water in a light wash of blue. And most of this is going to get painted over as well. And I'll be adding a lot more detail into this water, including the reflections. Okay, so the first wash is done. Now, before I start the second wash, I need this to dry quite a bit more than it is, so that the paint doesn't flow so much. And we'll get into painting that big, connected middle value shape. So I'll be right back. Alright, my paper is sufficiently dry, so I'm going to start from this side and work my way left, which is how I did it in the value study. I got this big old puddle of different kinds of green mixed up on my palette. So we're just going to start dropping in that big foliage shape. And I want this to be loose, I want this to be expressive. I want to paint this as if it was just one big mass. I'm not painting individual trees. And we're just going to play around with the green as we go. We're just going to mix in different colors here and there. I threw some cadmium yellow in. There's this little strip right down by the water in the reference photo of, it looks like some sort of floating plant. It's a really cool kind of pop of green that I want to try to replicate in the painting. So I'm going to drop that in there and we'll save that for later. We'll come back to that later. We'll paint around it in dark and get that to really pop. Kind of break up the shape at the top of the canopy. Just indicate the texture of some of those leaves. Drop some burnt umber in there, just add some variety. Greens in nature are never uniform. There's always tons of subtle variations going on. As those greens recede into the distance, we'll slowly add more blue to them, which will help them appear as though they're farther away. Just painting exactly what I did in my value study again, in color. That's all I'm doing. come right up to this tree here. We'll drop in some of that green reflection. We'll dull that color down a little bit with some burnt sienna. And you know what? I think it's time to switch to a smaller brush. I'm going to have to be painting finer details, so I'll use a smaller brush for that. So that's right there is a reflection of this mass of trees in the water. Very loosely indicate a few of those ripples here and there. Just painting little swips like that. Just quick little marks. Now we'll paint the body of this tree. We'll just drop in some burnt umber. We'll mix some cobalt blue into that and give us a nice brownish color. And we'll drop in the foliage at the base of this tree here. It's out in the water. It's a little more vibrant green. Connect that right into the shape of the trunks. And that also connects right into the shape of this background foliage. There's a nice sharp line at the bottom. It's like straight across and it's sharp. That'll make it look like it's sitting in water if you do that. Okay, so we can continue on with that background foliage now. A bit more blue-green. Drop that right in, connected to the shape of that trunk. We're really exaggerating the distance because the trees weren't far enough away in real life to have them look blue to my eye. But if we make it look that way in the painting, it will help extend the depth and the distance that we can achieve. It will help the background look even farther away than it is in real life. We've got some more vibrant green for this stand of trees right here. I'll just drop that in real quick. Again, touching right into the shape of the distant foliage. Alright, then right back to the background foliage. Touching into the shape of this tree here, it's all one big shape. It all touches and connects. And it all flows together. And you create these little areas of tiny gradients across the whole painting. It's really beautiful. You can start dropping in some of this reflection here. Since this is also in the middle value shape, paint in these kind of squiggly lines as it goes down to give you the impression of those ripples moving across the surface of the water. There's kind of a bunch of ripples as it goes that way, and I'll just use some dry brush to try to indicate that. So we got this foliage right here. It's very vibrant green, so I just dropped some more cadmium yellow into the green that was on the palette. Okay, we'll go back and mix up some more of that bluish green, although not quite as blue now since the trees are moving forward towards us. Paint around that trunk, that highlight that we wanted to preserve. We can start warming that up even more, since now these trees are very close to us. Paint around that trunk there. Just leaving some vertical highlights for some of those trunks that are being lit by the sun. This trunk here has a highlight on it as well. We can really lighten up that green, or warm up that green right here. Leave some areas as highlights in there for those leaves that are directly catching the sun, create kind of a sparkly effect. There's that little area of dark reflection back there that I really like. A line going across. So I need to start indicating some of the reflections going on in the water right here. Got some trunks over here that I need to paint in, but that's all going to be dark, so I'll wait for that area to dry up a little more before I worry about that. I can start dropping in some of this foliage up here. Because the trunks are going to be going that way. A little bit of a reflection that you can see on this one here too, so just drop that in with some quick dry brush marks. Okay, and that water does need a little more work to have it look like I want, but we'll save that for later. I need to darken up this area a little bit. And let's see, there's something I want to do right here. If you look in the reference photo, you can see how this very vibrant green bush here is being reflected in the water. So what I did there is I took a clean, damp brush and I just pulled straight down, lifted up some of that paint, and it'll create kind of a glow right there. There's a few more areas where I'm seeing that too. You just pull straight down and just give this kind of glow that reflects across the water. It's a little trick I've learned that really helps sell water. Just makes it look a little more like water. Now we can start working in some of these darks while this stuff is still pretty wet. There's just Payne's gray in there, there's some ultramarine blue. I like using ultramarine blue for my darker greens. And just gonna try not to get too carried away with the darks, especially in the background stuff. Just following my value study. That's really all I'm doing. Scratch out a few tree trunks with my fingernail here. It does help to kind of squint my eyes sometimes as I look at my value study and my reference photo. Helps simplify everything and make things just easier to understand. Just hint at a few darker tree trunks here and there. Don't want too much detail in the background stuff. Just enough to sell it. Darkening up this reflection just a little bit. Okay. So I need this area to dry out a little more before I add the branches in. So while that is drying, I'm gonna add some more interest to this water right here. Just mixing some cobalt blue into all these colors on the palette. And I'm just gonna glaze over this area a little bit. Get some more of those nice ripples in there, those light ripples. Just moving back and forth in these kind of horizontal lines. I'm going to start dropping in some of these trunks right here. Now that this area is dry enough. Alright, well, that's going to be a finished painting. My camera started acting up on me, but essentially all I did from where we left off was I went back and added some highlights and gouache on these lit areas of the branches of the trees and some of the trunks here and there. So I really hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you on the next one.